All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. All right. We have gone through the last day and a half with some very diverse panels dealing with our topic today of honor in service. And those topics have been very diverse, ranging from human trafficking to poverty to service learning to servant leadership and some in between. And one thing has tied them together, and that is this notion of leadership. Dr. Geller started out talking about leadership and 7 life lessons that apply whether you are in the military, in the government, or academia, across business. And we saw through those series of panels how some of what Dr. Geller had to say seemed to resonate in some of those panels. Some of those principles, people called them different things, but they resonated. So now as we get towards the end of the conference, and before we go over to listen and see Representative Lewis get the Jonathan Daniels Humanitarian Award, we want to tie the conference together, and I can think of no better speaker to tie the conference together and talk about leadership than Brigadier General retired Rebecca Halstead. Brigadier General Halstead is a 1981 graduate of West Point. She was the first female general from West Point to be promoted to general officer. As a logistics officer, she commanded progressively larger multi-function units ranging in size from 40 to 25,000. As commander of the 3rd Support Command, COSCOM, she was the first woman to command at the strategic level in Iraqi freedom. In 2006, Brigadier General Halstead was assigned as the Army's Chief of Ordnance and commander of the U.S. Army's Ordnance Center and school system in Maryland. Following 27 years of service in the military and with over 15 years of executive level leadership experience, she has served on the President's Military Leadership Diversity Commission, and now she has founded her own leadership consulting business with such clients as Procter & Gamble and most recently Walmart. I'm privileged personally to have served with Brigadier General Halstead in peace and war twice, and to call her both a mentor and a good friend. Today, she's going to speak on her core leadership philosophy, STEADFAST Leadership. Please join me in welcoming Brigadier General Halstead.
All right. Good morning again. So, what a great day to be a student, right? And it's not just for the students, that's for everybody in the auditorium. I'm one of these people that believes in lifelong learning. You know, you got to be a student every single day, that at the end of the day you can improve your foxhole because there's something that you can learn. I've had breakfast with the cadets this morning. I've been in several of the different classes over the last couple of days. And I always figure that if I lay my head down on my bed at night, you hear something shaking? I might be right just close enough to that podium to be doing that, huh? Okay, I'll move out of the way. That when I lay my head down on my pillow at night, I want to be able to say no regrets. I want to be able to say that today my life is better because someone was in it, because I was in their life, and that because I learned something. And hopefully they learned something from me. So what we have is we have about an hour together. My intent is to spend about 30 minutes sharing some lessons on leadership and about service and then the last 30 minutes open it up to you to ask me anything you want to ask me. And when I say ask me anything you want to ask me, I mean that. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know. If I hadn't thought about it in a while, I might tell you, let me just think for a second. But what you see is what you get. I've always led that way. What you see is what you get. I don't believe in non-attribution. If I say it here, or if I write something, you can take that to the bank. You can publish on the front page of the newspaper. And that's what I always told the folks that I led. If you're going to say something, you're going to do something, you're going to write something, then there's a couple of people that you better be prepared that might see it and read it. The President of the United States and your parents. Okay? And if you can't stand in front of them and squarely say, I meant what I said, or here's why I made that decision, it might not have been the right thing. And that's, I thought about that many times in Iraq with big decisions, I always thought, well, I'm going to make this decision. I'm not 100% sure because so many times we're not, but I am 100% sure of this. If I have to stand in front of President Obama's desk, or in that case, President Bush's desk, I would be able to give him the reason why I made the decision that I made. So at any rate, please feel free to ask anything in that 30-minute period. And that is really interesting, that noise. Oh, okay, I thought it was a podium, and I'm thinking, maybe I'm standing in the wrong place, so I will now ignore that. If it's not bothering you, it will not bother me. When I've been out and about since I retired in 2008, people will ask me, well, what did I do in the Army? And my response will always be, I was a soldier in the Army. I never say I was a general. I say I was a soldier. Because I believe that leadership is about your heart and your mind, that it's about what's on the inside. I really didn't care to have adjectives that described me as a leader. Short, 5'1.5", female, ordnance, officer. No, I was a leader. And that's what's about what's on the inside. And then I will also always tell them that it was an honor to serve and to lead with America's sons and daughters. In my mind, no greater honor. And there are many, many honorable professions out there. But for me, in my mind, there are very few, though, where we're willing to not only give our lives for each other, but we're willing to live for each other. I tend to frame it that way. And so that's what I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about, is that honor to serve and lead. And what does that leadership mean? And this morning at breakfast, one of the cadets asked me, when I graduated from West Point in 1981, did I think I would be a career officer? And I said, oh, no way. I mean, I went to West Point, I'm 18 years old, I have 4 years of West Point, and I have a 5-year requirement. So what I did know at West Point was that I had a 9-year commitment, and that I would do it honorably. And I said, and throughout the rest of my career, there were times when I realized I probably would stay for a career, but my goal was never to achieve a certain title or a certain rank. My goal was always that whenever I hung my boots up, and whenever I got presented the flag and I finally left the military, would be that they would say, well done, good and faithful servant to our nation. And whatever title's there is there, but I wasn't so concerned about that. And what I also did when I answered that question was, but I will tell you that you as a leader, you got to lead yourself, you got to be thinking about the future. And so I was taught by a wonderful mentor that you should look 2 jobs out, 1 promotion up. 2 jobs out, 1 promotion up. Because there are sometimes you will run into people, I had some cadet classmates that they wanted to be a general in the U.S. Army. Well, that's good that they wanted to be that, but in reality, life is going to have a journey. There's going to be things that happen. You're going to make choices, good and bad. People sit on boards that decide whether you should be promoted or not. Other people will dictate every assignment that you have, and so, you might not achieve that, but it's okay to have that goal. But I think that as a leader, you must always remain real. And to be real means, let me take this off in small chunks and look at the future in small chunks and how I influence that and shape the decisions that I'm going to make and the choices that I'm going to make. So one of the things is I came from a small town, no traffic lights, upstate New York. I had no intention of going to West Point. I was going to go to Ithaca College and be a physical education teacher. When you come from a small town, no traffic lights, you can be on every team and be considered a real athlete, okay? I wasn't quite the center of the basketball team, but, you get the idea. When you go to West Point, just like going to any of the colleges you're from, you find out that going from high school and being a stud or a studette to a college might mean you're lucky if you make the team, and if you make the team, if you get to play. When I went to West Point, I got to play softball and volleyball, and I did play. But the basketball team told me, don't even bother trying out because you're 5'1.5". If you're not at least 5'4", don't try out. Unfortunately, I actually listened to that, and I would give you as advice, no, still go try out, and then just tell them you didn't make the team. Because I am convinced that in looking back, that was one of the mistakes that I made, is I let someone tell me that if you're not 5'4", don't even try. And I'm like, no, I'm never doing that again. I'm at least going to try, and you're going to tell me I didn't make it, okay? Because height isn't everything, as I learned. That was my biggest challenge in the military, was being 5'1.5". But all along the way, my parents taught us 2 rules. Rule number 1, don't quit. Rule number 2, refer back to rule number 1, right? And I don't know about the rest of you, but there have been times in my life when I wanted to quit. Matter of fact, at West Point, if you look at my diary, for the first 3 days, it's all on one little piece of paper because we carried a little tablet where we wrote down, the meals and the chain of command and all, things we had to memorize. And they issued us a little notebook. Now, for women, because we were new, they decided to change our uniforms, and so they didn't give us any pockets. But we were still required to carry the notebook. So part of being a leader and leading yourself is being very creative, very innovative. So I always carried my notebook in my black nylon sock, right? So if I had to take a note, pull my leg up, take it out, and put it all back in there. Carried a lot of stuff in my hat, too. You'd be amazed how much I could carry in my hat. But on that little piece of notebook paper on the very first page was, day 1, hate it here, want to quit. Day 2, hate it here, want to quit, miss my parents. Day 3, about the same thing, miss my friends. But I always referred back to this rule, these 2 rules. Because if I had wanted to quit every time I wanted to quit because it got hard, it got uncomfortable, it wasn't fun maybe, I wouldn't be here today standing and talking to you about leadership. I wouldn't have had this journey that was, for me, incredible. Some of my highest highs and my lowest lows. 27 years, I graduated in 1981, 27 years, 18 moves, combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Having relationships and meeting people like Dave Gray, right? Growing up in the Army together. The relationships that you get when you're in college, and when I was having breakfast again this morning with the VMI students, I said there's one thing that happens, when you're in school, and some of you're company commanders, and you're on the brigade staff, and you've earned those places, and that makes your graduation even more rich. But the day you graduate, one thing you all have in common is you are VMI graduates. Or the day you graduate from West Point, one thing you have in common is you're all West Point graduates. And I love the fact that nobody can ever take that away from me. That when I meet up with someone else who might be a World War II veteran and they're a West Point graduate, immediately there's a bond. There's a bond that nobody can interfere with because we walk the same plane and we're part of that history. And so whatever school you represent or that you're in, that's huge. And you need to enjoy that. So when you want to quit, you just can't quit. And that's my mother cheering me on, by the way. I just finished Recondo. And I don't know if you do Recondo in any of your schools, but the very last thing in Recondo is you do the slide for life. So you take the pulley, you put it at the very top, and you climb the ladder, and you hook up, and you slide down into the lake, and I can remember, though, but picking up the pulley on the other side of the lake. And at that point, I've been up 7 days, and it's the only time in my life I ever hallucinated because, you just didn't get any sleep. And, we're doing all kinds of weird things out there in the field. And I had to tell you, my fun meter had pegged. And I pick up that pulley, and I'm going around the lake, and I was one of those that probably needed a little extra motivation that day. I'm kind of dragging butt a little bit. As I go around the end of the lake, all of a sudden I hear this, "Go, Becky!" And I look up on the ridgeline, and it is my mother, my father, and my grandparents yelling at me to go. And I can tell you, all of a sudden that pulley didn't weigh anything. And I get over there to the base of that tower, and I'm just putting that sucker up there, and I'm going to the top, and that slide for life, no hesitation, boom. Leaders encourage each other. My parents were leaders in my life. My grandparents, they encouraged me. Just that little bit of cheer got me into gear. And many, many times that I wanted to quit, I didn't because of them. And then we have to look at life as not challenges, but all those obstacles we run into, those are opportunities. Those are opportunities to excel, as they taught us at West Point. I ran into a lot of obstacles at 5'1½". In this picture, and I apologize, it's not very clear, but that is a Polaroid picture. So for all you youngsters, we used to have a camera where you took the picture and it shot a picture out at the bottom. Polaroid picture. And I found this when I retired, a little tiny, it was in my aerosol notebook. And it's graduation day, and I went, oh man, I've been telling this story forever. Let me scan that in and blow it up and so people can see graduation day. And I was at Command and General Staff College as a major in my mid-30s, and I get the call from the division commander of the 101st, and he says, Becky, we would like you to join the 101st and come be a major in the division this summer. Would you like to be part of our team? Are you going to say no? Yes, sir. Send me in, coach. Hooah! So I go back to my little staff section of 14, and they go, hey, what was the phone call about? I said, division commander just called me for 101st. Wants to know if I'd like to come be in the division. And they said, what did you tell him? I'm like, I told him yes, of course. And like, are you nuts? Yeah, I'm a little crazy. Why do you ask? You know, you're in your 30s. You're 5'1½". You're not even aerosol qualified. You don't have the badge. I go, so I'll go to aerosol school. How hard can it be? We've done obstacle courses our whole life, right? But the closer I got to Fort Campbell in August of '93, 100% humidity, 100 degrees. I go in to meet my first boss, my battalion commander. Sir, Major Halstead reports. He goes, hey, Becky, we're glad to have you here on the team. We got you an air assault course at the end of August. Anybody been to Kentucky in the end of August? It's awful. You can carry a piece of air around you with all that humidity. And then he says, I recommend you prepare and that you practice because I failed 3 times. Now, this guy was a linebacker of his college football team. He could crush me. He's like, huh. I'm thinking, I did not need to know you failed 3 times. That is not really motivating to me. But here's what it did for me. It reinforced to me that leaders prepare. Leaders rehearse. If you want to be on the team, you need to earn being on the team and being a leader on the team. So first of all, I would not even consider not going to the air assault school. If I'm going to be in the air assault division, I better be air assault. If I'm going to be in the airborne division, I better be airborne. If I'm going to go work for IBM and I'm going to be hired as an engineer, I better make sure my engineer skills are what they need to be. If I'm going to be a logistician like I was in the military, but I want to transfer over into the corporate world and be a supply chain management person, I better make sure I understand it, that I'm a subject matter expert. So I knew my number one problem would be that I'm 5'1½", so I started to look for short people with the air assault wings. Because I was like, if they can get them, I can get them. I grabbed them up. I said, this weekend, we're going to the obstacle course. You're going to show me how you do the confidence climb. Anybody done the confidence climb? There's a good reason we call it that, right? Because the higher you go, the further apart the beams come. And by the time I get to the top, you got to go over the top. I can't even reach it anymore. I tell you what, also, as there's a chaplain in the room, I exercise prayer a lot too. Obviously, I made it over the obstacle, made it through the first day. The very last day, though, was a 12-mile foot march. And you have to do it in 3 hours. And I've always been a runner. I haven't always been a marcher. Marching when you're short and keeping up with everybody else. And why they put all the short people in the back of the formation never made any sense to me. I get to go be road guard and be back to the formation. I'm like, zing, zing, zang, zang all the time. So I'm out there doing the 12-mile foot march, and I'm going, there's no way I'm going to do a stride like this, so I'm going to do a little jog. I'm going to do a jog the whole time. At the 6-mile point, they have a water point halfway through. And I'm going to stop. I'm going to just recover for a minute. I'm going to drink my water. And here's my point to you, folks. No matter what profession you go in, sometimes in life, you have to make sure that you stop, that you breathe, that you recover, that you reward yourself so you have enough energy to keep going. Because so often, we find leaders that are so driven to get to the top that by the time they get there, they're expended. There's a great book by Allison Levine. It's about climbing mountains. She's the same height as me, but a little bit smaller. She's very, very petite. Only woman to climb the highest peak in every hemisphere. And she says, I said, what happens when you climb these peaks and you see that people have died along the way? I mean, that must be really tough. She said, it is. And she says, but you know what? The majority of the people who die climbing mountains, they do not die climbing them on the way up. They die on the way back down. Because they have driven themselves so hard that they have physically run themselves into the ground. They run out of energy and oxygen. We want you to live your full potential as a leader, so you need to take care of yourself. And that takes a great deal of discipline. So on the last day, we're out there on the 12 mile, we're at the 6 mile, I get my rest, my recovery, my drink, my water, and off we go. At the 9 mile mark, you see this big dude right here in the middle? That's a sergeant, non-commissioned officer, ranger. He and I had been in the course all week. He goes zooming by me, and then he stops and he walks. So I'm just steady state, steadfast, just steady state. So I pass him, he passes me. About the third time, he says, "Ma'am, you're killing me." I said, "Who are you and why do I care? This is an individual course." He says, "I'm a ranger. And if you beat me to the finish line, my ranger buddies will never let me live it down." I'm like, "Oh, we're going to have some fun with this." If you want it, you got to earn it. I'm not going to give it to you. Now, as a leader, though, here's another point. As a leader, you got to be real. You got to be realistic. You got to know your own strengths and weaknesses. Every single one of you has your own unique leader DNA. Sit down sometime and write down, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses? And I already know that 5'1.5" against a 25-year-old sergeant, ranger, 8-week course, ranger, pretty elite. Oh, by the way, his arms are bigger than my legs, right? He can crush me. The chances of me beating him are not very good, unless he breaks a leg, takes a wrong turn, or passes out or something. But I do know this, that if he wants to beat me, I'm going to push him and make him earn it. So let me ask you this. How do you, faculty, students, it doesn't matter, any team that you're on, how do you push each other to be the best that you can be? Because we should be doing that with each other. We shouldn't let somebody not bring their best to the game. Now, maybe there's a problem. You got to wrap your arm around and say, "Hey, what's going on today? You're not acting, you're not playing, you're not doing the way you normally do." So I'm going to push him if he wants to win. And realistically, I know he probably will. So we do that all the way. We get to the end, he's number 1, and I'm number 2. But here's another point. That day, I ran the fastest 12-mile foot march that I ever ran in 27 years in the Army. My best time, under 2.5 hours. Smoked it, as we say, right? But why did I do that? Because he was pushing me. Now, I don't know if it was the fastest that he ever ran it. I don't even know his name. But here's what we all know. He ran it faster than he intended on running it that day because he was no way he was going to let me beat him, right? So it might not have been his best, but at least he ran it faster than he intended. So what I want you to ask yourself is each day, are you bringing your best to the team? See, I think as a leader, you deserve the best. The people that I lead, they deserve the best of me. Coming here to speak, I've given this. I couldn't even tell you how many times of versions of leadership speeches I've given. I don't know, a couple hundred. But that doesn't mean I don't prepare. What does this audience need? The stories don't change much, right, because they're from my life. But what is most appropriate for you? Always prepare. They deserve your best. And leadership is about the led. In the Army, I used to say, it's not about the general. It's about the soldier. It's the soldier who's doing the, running the gun, they're on the gun trucks, and they're running the convoy security, and they're the convoy commanders, and they're delivering the supplies, and they're flying the helicopters. I sit up in a helicopter. I think that's my next one. Let me show you. Well, I'll get to it. Remind me of the helicopter story. But it takes a great deal of discipline to remember that leadership is about the led. And where does the discipline fall in your life? It should fall in all 3 of these categories in my mind. Fitness, physically, mentally, spiritually. Physically, mentally, spiritually. Because you can be really physically fit. But if you don't allow your heart to engage when you lead, and you don't show emotion when you should show emotion, then the people you lead, are they really going to know that you care? Are they really going to know that you're compassionate? Are they going to see your authenticity? And all 3 things of these are important. Usually, typically, the number 1 thing that we run empty on is physical. I left the Army in 2008 because I became very ill with chronic fibromyalgia. Now, I don't know why I got fibromyalgia. I have a good sense of probably the fact that a very high pace for so many years, lack of sleep, deployments, whatever, but it got so out of control, and I was on so many prescription medications from the military that I just said, hey, time out. I am 49 years old. I plan to live to be 100, and I can't get my arms around this in the military, so I am going to retire, and I'm going to figure this out. I'm on no prescription medications now, but here's what I figured out. In the military, I was actually physically fit, but I wasn't healthy. Wasn't eating the right foods. I wasn't getting the right amount of sleep. I actually wasn't taking care of myself. Well, I could max my PT test, but I wasn't really taking care of myself, my health. And if the physical tank goes empty, you can have all the time in the world and you can't do anything with it. So you got to kind of keep fueling all three of those. And it takes a great deal of discipline. And discipline comes in other ways too, like what's the hardest muscle in your body to train? Anybody? I think I heard brain. It's actually the tongue. Anybody ever say anything you regret? All of us. Read a great book, 3 seconds. If everybody took 3 seconds before they said something, they'd be a lot happier with what they said. My mother gave me the book. Think there's a message? I don't know. It could be. Discipline. Very hard to train the tongue. Very hard to listen, but leaders have to listen. Leaders have to listen. I think the number one most important leadership attribute is discipline. What most people look for in their leaders, though, is number one on surveys. Survey says number one is integrity. Well, I bet if you look at most of those surveys, discipline wasn't a choice. Because we don't usually put that on there as a value or an attribute. We put integrity and trustworthiness and all these other things. But see, I think the only way that you can be a person of character and have integrity is to have discipline, because it is too easy to do what's wrong. It's a slippery slope. What keeps you doing right and choosing the harder right over the easier wrong is self-discipline and doing all these other things. And it's discipline that helps you hold yourself accountable. So as a leader, you have to lead yourself first before you can even begin to expect to lead other people. If you're not the standard, why would anybody want to follow you? And if you're not being the standard, people know you're not being the standard. And you say, well, you're in a leadership position doesn't make you a leader. What makes you a leader is when you demonstrate to those you lead that you have character and you have competence and you are the standard. You're holding yourself accountable. And each of us has to figure out how we do that. Many, many years ago, I began by going, you know what? If I don't look soldiers in the eye, I cannot connect with them. I've got to look them in the eye. Now, 5'1.5", that's challenging, right? Because all soldiers stand at attention and look straight out, So I can remember going through a line many, many times going, hey, down here, hello, look me in the eye, right? But then you do that, they kind of smile, they kind of laugh, use a little bit of humor. But that's how you connect. That's how you connect. So I started in the morning going, I've got to make sure I'm grounded, because candidly, the higher I went, the longer I worked, the greater the responsibility. It could become a little overwhelming. It did become a little overwhelming in Iraq. Huge logistics mission in the entire country of Iraq. 20,000 people. And sometimes what happens is you think you're the only person out there. And you take a deep breath and you go, wait a second. I have got 16 colonels out there. 7 of them brigade commands. I got 27 battalions. We have 200 plus company commanders out there doing their jobs. We got all those lieutenants and all those non-commissioned officers. I am not the only one. I have ultimate responsibility, but let me breathe, because they are all out there leading as well. But the way I got grounded is I look myself in the mirror every single morning. Look myself straight in the eye. Why? Because if you cannot look yourself straight in the eye, you cannot look the people that you lead straight in the eye. Now think about it. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone and they're looking the other direction the whole time? Or maybe somebody has to bring you bad news, and they bring you in. You see this a lot in the business world as well. They bring you in, and they don't really want to tell you the bad news, so they talk to you for a minute, they look off this way, they talk to you a little bit, they cannot look you in the eye because they don't want to give the bad news to you. You've got to be a leader that can look into the eyes of the people that you lead for good or for bad. You got to be able to cry with them. You got to be able to laugh with them. You got to know that the difference between a pat in the back and a kick in the butt are only 8 to 10 inches, and every one of us deserve both. That's what leadership's all about. So I would look in the mirror and I would take my dog tags, because we wear dog tags in the Army, and they're so important. They represent our values, and we wrap them around our neck. And so every day I'd look there in the mirror and I'd grab my dog tags and I would think about the warrior ethos. I'd say it out loud. I'll always place the mission first. I'll never accept defeat. I'll never quit. I'll never leave a fallen comrade. And then on that I would have my shield of faith, Joshua 1:9. For me, very personal, faith. Joshua 1:9. I'd recite the verse out loud. Be strong, courageous. Don't be terrified. Don't be discouraged, because God's with you wherever you go. That's personal. That's for me. You have to figure out what's personal for you and what works for you. But my point is, do it. And then drape those dog tags around my neck. I can't tell you how many people in the corporate world have taken the warrior ethos and put it on their business card, put it in their office. Because, see, it's not just military. Every single person has a purpose and a mission. Kathy talked about purpose last night. Once you find your purpose, you can make a difference in this world. We're going to have a ceremony today for someone who made a difference in this world. Why? Because as a young man, he figured out his purpose in life. All of us wish for other people that they find their purpose early and soon so they can make a difference. So you drape those dog tags. Now today I don't wear dog tags around my neck, but I carry dog tags. The dog tags I carry, or I keep them in my briefcase, carry with me at all time. There are multiple dog tags on here. And on them are line by line by line. And what it has is it has the date, the rank, and the name of my soldiers that were killed in Iraq between 2005 and 2006. And I carry those. I had my driver engrave them on the dog tags because as I talk to their families and I stay in touch with their families, I cannot assure their families that the nation won't forget, but I can assure their families their commander won't forget. It reminds me of the ultimate responsibility that I had. It reminds me of the sacrifice that they gave. It reminds me to live my life fully today and with purpose in their honor for their service. Figure out how you put your boots on, your heels on, your shoes on every morning and prepare yourself for the day. Because you may not have a team that you lead, but you lead yourself. How are you doing that? How's that working out for you? I did click it. I'll click it again. All right. Here's the one I was at. About trusting yourself. Everybody on team is value added. Do you think we picked the right guy to be in charge of my physical security detachment? That's Master Sergeant Mason. I stand behind him. You can't see me. You know? Quiet giant, quiet professional, awesome man. And then that's my aide de camp in the back. We're getting ready to go out on a convoy in Iraq. Loved him, trusted him, and he trusted me. Be up there in a helicopter at night, flying at night in blackout operations, and I would just look around the helicopter and I go, boy, I just thank the good Lord for Master Sergeant Mason, for the soldier behind the machine gun who knows when to shoot, don't shoot. Remember earlier when I said leadership's about the lead, not about the general, but about the soldier? In reality, it's not about the instructors. You are important. You lead by example. You better be leading by example. You better be making this the best experience that you can make for your students. Because why? Because it's about the students. It should not be about the doctor. It should be about the patient. The pharmaceutical industry should not be about making money off the drugs. It ought to be about making any pharmaceutical drug that actually helps someone heal, right? We should be turning businesses into things like that. It's a little side note. Anyhow, trust yourself, trust others. Let people do their job. Let them know that they are value added and they are an important part of the team. Now, I remember being on a helicopter, and I was the senior person always in the 3 helicopter formation, so I had a headset on. And which is kind of good. You get to listen to all the chatter with the pilots and everything. So one night we're flying, and all of a sudden I hear, get to the east side of the river, or you're going to get shot out of the air. Not what you want to hear. You know, at that point, a second becomes like a year. You're going like, whoa. And the thing is, it's like, it doesn't seem like we are maneuvering to the east side of the river. It kind of seems like we're still going in the same direction we were going. So I had cadet class the other day, and I went around the room, and I said, okay, so you're there. You got the headset on. It's night. You know, you can hear, the machine gunners they're I'll tell you what, when you're pausing in a helicopter and it's kind of quiet and it's kind of dark and all of a sudden a machine gun goes off, it just brings new meaning to life, okay? It is so loud. Anyhow, so I said, so I'm going to go around the room and tell me, what would you do? What would you do? You heard that, but it doesn't seem like the helicopter's moving. And I got everything from I would scream to I would have to say something to I wouldn't say anything, I'll let the pilots do what they do. I said, well, inside you want to say something. Because, well, maybe they didn't hear it. Maybe I am the only one that heard it and I should say something, right? But then your leadership hat goes on and you go, no, they probably heard it and they're figuring out what they have to do to maneuver the helicopters. And so the example I gave to the cadets was I said, if right now when we were having this conversation and General P walked in, what would you all do? We'd stop having the conversation, right? I mean, we'd turn to General P and start listening and putting all of our attention on General P. Why? Because he's a 3-star. He just walked into the room. I said, if I said something, what would happen? They'd all start paying attention to me. Those pilots would start going, yes, ma'am, got that under control. They start answering all my questions. And what they should really be doing is figuring out how we're going to maneuver those 3 helicopters to make sure we get to the east side of the river and we don't get shot out of the air. So I said nothing. But it wasn't because I didn't want to say something. It's just that I decided I'd practice that 3 seconds, practice that discipline. But you're going to find out in leadership that you have to have that kind of discipline because sometimes you cannot help yourself. And what do? You speak and you get right in there and you create chaos when we're supposed to be the calm in the chaos. We're supposed to create hope, not incite fear or make it more complicated. And then there are other times when, by golly, you are the decision maker on the ground and you do have to insert yourself, but you're always trying to figure out exactly where that is. Dave Gray and I have had so many conversations about where the commander should be on the battlefield, you know? And there is no set answer for that. But you have to be all over the battlefield, but you got to be at the right place at the right time to influence in a way that only you can influence. And you got to figure that out. So it's great fun, but you got to trust yourself and trust others. And let me tell you what, success is a team sport. And I don't think of diversity as black and white and whatever. I think of diversity as thinking differently. Bring all these people to the table. They have different backgrounds, different cultures, different education, different skill sets. And then what we can do is we can think differently and come up with the best solutions for whatever problems we are trying to tackle. These are all the commanding generals in Iraq from 2005 to 6. It is a very diverse team. We have a Polish general, we have a Korean general, we have a British general, we have armor, we have infantry, and we have the only solo logistician on the team. Only female, also the shortest. My mother says it looks like the little girl who ran to get in the picture with all the big guys. Only a mother gets to say that. But I was the only logistician. And so one of the things I knew is I needed to earn respect from my fellow general officers. And I could only do that by making sure that when I'm at the table and I'm listening and I'm participating and I'm contributing, is that I'm a subject matter expert on logistics and I help shape success by what I bring to the table. And they either value that or they don't value that. They either respect it or they don't respect it, but it's got to be earned. And it was a great team. And hardest year of my life. Highest highs, lowest lows, but the most rewarding year of my life, hands down. And you can ask me about that later. And then as a leader, you just have to embrace and you have to encourage people. Now, 20,000 soldiers, there's no way I could hug every single one of them and say thank you. I mean, you just can't do it. But the ones you can, do it, right? The ones you can, be present, do it. And so when we're getting ready to redeploy, about 6,000 redeployed out of Balad, Iraq. That's where my headquarters was, and we had a huge airfield there. So I looked at my sergeant major, and I said, Sergeant Major, when everybody's loading up on those planes, if we are here at Balad, we're going to go out, and we are going to say thank you. I'm going to give him a hug, and I'm going to say thank you. And he kind of looked at me like I was crazy, but he knows I didn't sleep very much, a weakness, by the way. I didn't sleep very much, and so off we went. And then I had somebody challenge me on it and say, well, ma'am, maybe you're thanking someone who actually didn't do that good of a job. So I had to practice the 3-second rule and not say what immediately came to my mind. I had to think about my answer. And I said, well, here's the deal. I do not know for a fact that every single person that I said thank you to was the best soldier, the best leader, did their job. They might have even been pending court-martial for all I know. But here's what I do know. They spent 1 year of their life away from their homes, away from their families, serving their country, and they did it in Iraq, in combat, and I think, at least for that, they deserve 2 words, which is thank you. And they're going to get it from me. You know? And I'll let the rest of the chips fall where they may. 2 simple, powerful words. They gave up a lot to be there. So, you know, how do you encourage and how do you embrace other people and let them know that they're value added? And this will be my last slide. The last slide I'll leave up there during the Q&A. But look, like Kathy said last night, we all have a purpose. Now, sometimes when we first start out, it is we want to be successful. Nobody will look badly at you because you want to be successful. We all want to be successful. But there's a lot of people in this world who are successful and they do nothing with it. They do nothing with it. They get the job done, but it's all about them. How much money can they make? What is the title? What's the house look like? What kind of car are they driving? What's the status? I would much rather that when you walk out today, maybe you'll walk out a little differently than when you walked in. Instead of just wanting to be successful, you would like to be significant in your life. And to me that means have purpose. That whatever you do, that it has purpose. That you're making a difference in someone else's life. So when I did my definition of leadership, instead of ending it with effectively accomplish the mission, that's what leaders do, I put, and make a difference. Mother Teresa didn't make a lot of money, but did she make a difference? I hope that works for you. So this slide, I'm with an Iraqi colonel. So part of my command, we also had 3 Iraqi regiments. And so I visited all those regiments. And I visited where they worked, where they lived, spent time with the commander, did the battlefield circulation. And when I was visiting down the Iranian border with this Iraqi colonel, we spent the day together. At the end of the day, we sat, we had tea. And I was just so moved by this man because in the southern part of Iraq at that time is much like what we're seeing on the news now with ISIS. Ungoverned space, just a bit of chaotic. And so the Iraqi army down there, they were not wearing their uniforms to get to work. When they got to their place of work, they put their uniform on. Why? Because if people saw them wearing their uniform, while they were out at the base during the day, they'd go back in and they'd kill a brother, they'd kill a wife or a family member, a son or child. How many of you would go where you go to work or you go to school if while you're gone, somebody came in and killed your family members? Would you have that much conviction? Would you have that much determination to make a difference? Well, he did. He had already had his brother killed. And so I just felt compelled to say to him, thank you for your service to your country in a time like this. Talk about courage and conviction. And then he stood up. Now, we'd had a translator all day because we did a lot of chatter, and he didn't speak English. But he stood up and he said, no, wait, sit. And he walked across to the other side of the room, and he took his national colors off the staff, and he folded them, and he kissed them, and he gave them to me. And we stood there, tears rolling down our cheeks. 2 leaders with character and competence, heart to heart, leading us about what's on the inside. We needed no translator, 0 translator. What we knew is that what we were doing was important, that our lives had purpose. And I can tell you that at that moment, so much zoomed in front of me. Like tomorrow night, General Hill and I are going to be up here doing mentorship. Zoomed in front of me was watching General Hill in South America with President Uribe in Colombia mentoring and speaking to the SECDEF and all that. And I would be sitting in the back taking notes on the sidelines going, I'm just a country girl from a town with no traffic lights. What am I doing here? Well, I'll tell you what I was doing there. I was watching his leadership. I was being shaped to be a leader. He was preparing me for that moment. A lot of leaders prepared me for that moment. A lot of soldiers lifted me up and also helped prepare me for that moment. I wish on every one of you that moment where you go, I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing for all the right purposes, and that you make a difference. And that's why I added it to my last line in my definition of leadership. Boy, if we all just make a difference in this world, what a greater world it will be, right? And then how you do that is so important. And it starts with leading yourself first. Leading yourself first, being the standard, holding yourself accountable. So we have about 18, 20 minutes, and I'd be happy to take anything you want to ask me, any question at all. And I'll just leave that up there in case somebody wants to write it down or whatever. I did write a book. That's the name of the book. So I asked the cadets this morning, I said, why do you think I put a star in the word you? They said, well, because you were a general. And I go, no. See, that's what all adults think that. But I also do leadership with 6th grade up to CEO. If you ask 6th graders, hey, why did I put a star in you? And one little kid answered it perfectly. He goes, because I've got, he didn't say star potential, but that's what it means. Because I have star potential in me. I could be a star. That's right, you could be a star. Every one of us has star potential in life. Okay, questions, Q&A. Somebody. What do you think, you're going to go on a break? Okay, yes, sir. I'm sorry, it's really hard to see, so feel free to wait.
I was wondering if you could speak to more about the Iraqi general you're working with who had exchanged flags, or
Yes.
the flag, and to the idea of Iraq as a nation state versus it not being able to succeed as a nation state. It's a country that's been drawn on a map and people are struggling to accept that national identity, whereas countries in Europe and the United States have become a country through our own self-declaration, an outside country. Do you think there's any hope for that country to succeed as a state the way it is, or is it time to give up on that idea?
Yeah. Well, I'll just keep it really simple. Number one, I think we made a difference while we were there. I would never say that I have no hope for them to get to that end state, but it will not be easy and it will be very long. It will always be a country of conflict because it has been for many, many, many years. But if I didn't think there was hope, I certainly would not have wanted to be there and let our American men and women give the ultimate sacrifice. But like anything, you go in and do what you need to do, what our country needs to do, and having an end state, having goals, having objectives are very, very important to that. Not having it makes it very difficult to see whether or not you were successful. But it is very devastating for those of us who have served over there to see what's going on. I'm just one of those people. I'm never going to give up hope. But hope, as a great general once wrote, hope is not a method. Hope is an emotion. How we do that to help them has to be crafted very, very carefully, and I'm not sure we've crafted that properly all along the way. Tough. It's just tough, but I haven't given up hope myself. Because for me to give up hope means to say, I think that my soldiers died in vain, and I will never feel that way. Because when you go in and you sit down with the local leader, I sat down with a local gentleman who was responsible for the newspaper and the television in the Sunni Triangle for like the last 20 years. And he literally brought in newspapers to show us how and what he could write under Saddam. I mean, he was essentially dictated everything that was written. At the point that we were there, he was so excited because now he has so much more liberty to write what he wants. And he says, someday, my hope is that I can print a newspaper where I can write about Sunni and Shiite in the same paper, instead of like Monday is Sunni, Tuesday is Shiite, right? And I asked him, I said, help me understand how someone like Saddam was able to maintain such tight grip and control on the people. And he says, when Saddam sends in his people to go to every other house and shoot a male and kill them, it doesn't take more than that. That was one of the examples that he gave us. And he brought a newspaper and showed kind of during that time, kind of like the edict that went out. And so that was like, wow, yeah, you're right. It wouldn't take very much. And the other piece to that is where we believe in trust and integrity, and we instill trust, right? We want our leaders to be trustworthy. We want to be able to trust them, and they trust us. I think someone said it last night, the more trust you give, the more trust you get. But the way he operates, Saddam operated in that culture, was he's going to instill distrust so that you all wonder who really has the real truth. And maybe none of you do, except for him, and so he's able to control his leaders that way too. Not a good way to do business. So it's kind of an answer for you without, if I knew the real answer to your question, I wouldn't be standing on this stage, right? But you have to, yes, sir.
Man, I understand this is a difficult question, so I get it. It's a little hard for you to answer. But what is a time when you were in Iraq that your leadership was truly tested, and how did you deal with that instance?
Sure. Well, first of all, my leadership was probably truly tested every single day. Okay, so I probably have way more examples than you realize I have. So that's part about stay real, right? It is not a cakewalk. It is very difficult. So many come to my mind. One of the ones that I gave the cadets yesterday, I'll give to you very, very quickly, is that as a logistician, we do not own battle space. So if you take the entire country of Iraq, my folks lived at 55 different bases. I had responsibility for 5 of those bases, not the least of which was Balad, and 30,000 people lived there. But the space outside that was the combat arms, your divisions, and all that. So they're the ones who did all the maneuvering out there in terms of security to keep the battle space safe, if you will. Well, in the South, we had a lot of coalition in charge in the South. I had a brigade in the South, I had an infantry brigade in the South, and I had a logistics brigade in the South. And my infantry brigade did a lot of operations with our radio relay points, very small units, and they got to deliver supplies out there and do all this kind of stuff. Well, as they navigate, maneuver through that battle space, another country, it was part of the coalition, has responsibility to put the checkpoints out, the snipers out, and be the ones that provide that security there. We do the route security while we're on it, but they're the ones that are, keeping people away from the route itself. So my guys go out and do a mission on a Friday night, and they get ambushed, and we lose a soldier. So my colonel, the infantry brigade colonel, goes back to that particular country's leadership and says, hey, you guys said it was all part of the plan. We briefed it. You said you'd be there, and you didn't show up. So they all agreed. They went through the planning process, everything else. They went out and did the next mission. They didn't show up again. Got ambushed again. Lost another soldier. So my colonel calls me and says, man, we got another mission tonight, and I need permission to run this op. You know, this is a platoon-level op for infantry, to put some snipers out and make sure the checkpoints are okay, and I know how to do it, and I can do it, and I need your permission to do it, because I would be doing it in another general's battle space. And so I gave him permission, and I have no regrets for doing that. I only regret that I didn't inform my boss, right? So I gave him permission because we had to get the mission done. And oh, by the way, we got the mission done, and nobody was killed. And once again, the folks didn't show up. So the next thing I had to do, well, then my boss called me. My 3-star boss called me and said, Becky, tell me about this mission down, and he gave the whole thing. Because of that country now they're pretty upset because my infantry brigade was doing those sort of maneuvers in their battle space. We were doing it because they wouldn't do them. So it was a tough decision for me to do. I had to ask forgiveness instead of permission. I did ask forgiveness instead of permission. But I failed. I should have informed my boss the minute I made the decision and why. Because, you know, when you don't do that, you don't keep them informed, they might second guess you the second time. But it was a tough decision because I knew we're doing something that's not in our mission set. But it's also tough because I'd rather take a heat round for that than to lose another soldier. To have another soldier die because people aren't doing their job. So there's so many like that. I had soldiers on a checkpoint that I found out were stealing from the local Iraqis. Some of them rip your leadership heart right out of your chest. I'm like, I can't even believe it. What do you mean? How could you? They set up a checkpoint, you know, where they weren't supposed to, and they were stealing. You can bet those guys got court-martialed, right? So that kind of rips your heart out going, wait a minute, where were your values that day? Where's the leadership values on your kit bag, you know? So, you know, those are tough things that you have to do, but if you don't do what's right, if you're not demanding, you don't have high standards, then you get mediocrity. And not a person in this room woke up today and wanted to be mediocre, right? So lots of them, but yes, ma'am.
There is no I in team.
Yes.
And you do talk about bringing, you know, the content of who you are, what you're responsible for to the table. Could you also talk a little bit about bringing a woman to the table? Because again, you were, you know, the first, you know, general to reach this, and you went through West Point at a time when they had just started coeducation. So I'll put you maybe a little bit on the spot and ask you maybe to speak to some of the female cadets here in the audience,
Sure.
some of whom might be considering a military career, or just being a woman in a leadership position.
Right.
Any words of wisdom or experience, pitfalls, triumphs you might want to share with us?
Okay, that's like a whole nother session, but first of all, what I tell all people is be yourself, right? And I always laugh. I said, you know, it wasn't like I got a choice. You know, it wasn't like on March 26th I went, wait a second, I don't want to go into the world unless I'm a boy, you know, because it's going to be really hard out there, you know. So you just go, the good Lord made me a woman, and my parents raised me to say, you can be whatever you want to be, and don't let other people tell you otherwise. So I had a great foundation that way. But even so, you get to West Point, you start being hazed. Look, first of all, everybody got hazed. And so very quickly, I'm one of those people that I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I know I'm being hazed because I'm a woman. Okay, well, this guy over here is being hazed because he's got crooked teeth, and this one over here because he's 8 foot tall, you know, and very uncoordinated. So everybody's getting hazed for something. It's just really easy to haze us because right away we're girls. So first of all, you go, okay, so just don't take it personal because it's not changing. It is what it is. And initially, I wanted to quit because it was hard. It was not fun. It is not fun all day long being told, I'm going to run you out of this man's army. But actually, that kind of turned into, you want me to leave? You're going to have to kick me out because I am not quitting. So it actually probably turned down a little bit. It made me stronger instead of weaker, right? But then as I kind of grew up, I found myself initially trying to be like the guys. Like be one of the guys, you know, talk like the guys. You know, we always had real short haircuts, but maybe do things that I, you know, just to kind of be with the team, right? And I think that if I look back on it, that's peer pressure and that's a shortfall. What I tell everybody is be yourself. Be yourself. So, you know, and I talk about leadership DNA. That means every single one of us should sit down and go, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? You know, and so because the more you can be yourself, the more comfortable you are in your skin, the better leader you're going to be. You just are. Now, obviously, in my whole career, I only ever worked for men. I never worked for a woman, ever. So, I just grew up with all men. Only female battalion commander in the 25th Infantry Division, the only brigade female commander in the 10th Mountain, the only female commanding general in Iraq. So by the time you've done it for 20-some years, you also get kind of used to it. But I can tell you the first time I walked into Baghdad at the headquarters and all the Iraqi division commanders, you could almost hear their necks breaking as I walked into the room, because they don't have any women, and they're like, how did she get in here? Like, who is she? But, I came to VMI in 1991. I was an aide-de-camp to the 3-star over at Fort Lee, Virginia, and there weren't any women cadets. And I was the only woman in the room that day, too. They introduced all the generals, and then they introduced all the generals' aides, and I was the only female aide. And I'm telling you, I remember that day. It's in my diary. I can remember feeling like there was no oxygen in the room, And I got to meet the lawyer that was leading the case on why we will not have women. And you can analyze that every which way, and I even understand probably all sides of it. But at the end of the day, I've always reminded myself, and I've always reminded the people that I've led, a couple things. Leadership comes from the inside. Leadership comes from the inside, and everybody's value added. And if they're not feeling like they're value added, that's a leader not doing their job. So yeah, I've been singled out. It's not easy. It's not fun. And I got a lot of stories, but unfortunately I don't have time to go into it. But I just, be yourself. Lead yourself. And I have a little saying, build a bridge and get over it, right? So sometimes you're going to be able to change someone's perception finally of, African Americans in the military, women in the military. But then there are others, they're so mired in that. And sometimes it is their fault because they have a choice, right? But if you think about it, I can think about one of my bosses who was my mentor, my very first one, Colonel T. Irby, and he grew up down in Mississippi. And I think he really had a hard time accepting women in the military, mostly because of his background and his culture. But when he finally saw the women in his unit perform, he changed. And here's another one that changes people. When men have daughters. It's amazing. I always tell them, why did it take having a daughter before you figured it out? But a lot of my classmates in 81 at West Point will come up to me and say, I'm so sorry the way we treated you. And I don't even remember that particular person treating me bad. I don't personalize it like that. It was a culture that treated us bad. And he said, I'm so sorry about the way we treated you, and I'm so glad you stuck it out. And in that particular case, he was just proud of what I was doing now in the military. And then he says, because I have a daughter now that wants to go to West Point. And I went, aha, Isn't it amazing when it becomes very personal like that? But for all you men in the room who don't have a daughter yet, don't have a wife yet, don't wait for that, for the lights to come on. Everybody's value added. All right? I think I have time for one more. Do I? Okay, I saw you stand up. I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you. Okay, one more. Yes, sir.
Would you just comment on, the newspapers these days are full of these stories about at least two very senior people who somewhere along the line, all the foundational stuff that you described,
Yep.
somewhere along the line, they lost their selflessness or they lost something else and it falls apart in the end.
Sure does.
Why don't you comment?
Yeah, it's crazy. I look at these things every single day. And of course, the higher you go, the farther you fall. But candidly, I don't know what's going through their minds. Do they honestly think that they're so powerful now and they have so many connections now and they're so successful now that the rules don't apply? I don't know. But all I do know is that I don't want to grow up to be like them, right? But I do believe in my concept of they did not lead themselves. They stopped leading themselves. They stopped being the example, and they figured they could get away with it. Unfortunately, some do, by the way, as we know. But and they weren't listening to both their heart and their mind. When I think about General Petraeus, married 40 years, and then he has an affair, and it takes down. The whole house comes down. That's leading. That is not leading with your mind. That's leading with all emotion, and a leader leads with both. When I think of Hillary Clinton, are you serious? You really think you can't use personal email? Like, who? We have privates that know already that they can't do that, right? I always use the example, I had a lieutenant and I don't have time for the story, but it's in my book. And this lieutenant is adamant that he was doing nothing wrong. But I had the private that was in there, that was videotaping the whole thing, moves the camera, then moves it back. And I said, why did you move the camera away from the incident? And he says, I'm trying to save my lieutenant's ass, I quote. Okay? So I look at the lieutenant and I said, so you're going to tell me that this private, with really no time in grade, that he knows it's wrong, but you don't? College education, second deployment to Iraq, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Now, I did ask him why did he move it back, because his platoon sergeant tapped him on the shoulder and said, God bless that platoon sergeant. So, sir, I don't know except that they're not leading themselves with both. So sometimes your emotion takes over. You know, I had this conversation with the Secretary of the VA. He's a good friend of mine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did he do that? Because we all know if you're in the military, you know if you're special forces or not, you know. Civilians might not figure that out. But I also know him, and he's such a humble man, and he's so authentic. And he did not need this job. He's got all the money in the world. But his heart and his mind told him, take this because maybe I can make a difference. So I'm like, why did you say that, Bob? But I know Bob well enough that his intent was he was trying to relate. He was trying to connect. He wanted to let that veteran know that he's not some big secretary of the VA up here. He's just another vet that cares. But don't sensationalize it and try to make it something it's not by making the story bigger. But I did tell him, I said, but you know, thanks for admitting to it. Thanks for continuing to be real. And we all make mistakes. There's not a person in this room that hasn't said something incorrectly. There's not a person in this room that hasn't made a mistake. I just got interviewed by Harvard for about 3 hours. And they cut that all down and put it something else. And I made a mistake in the interview. I said, I'm the first kid from my hometown to go to West Point. And I'm not. I'm the first kid from my hometown to graduate from West Point. And I didn't know the other kid that went and then left. And so when I was reviewing it, my mother reminded me, no, you're the first kid to graduate, Halstead. So I wrote Harvard and I said, take that line out because it's not totally accurate. But what I would say to you is, what we don't want to do is we're going to be logically and our human nature is to be judgmental of these people. But what we should really do is say, I don't want to grow up to be like that. What can I learn from them that makes me a better leader, and don't fall into that trap? Thank you for your questions. I got to go so you can go. So have a great day.
John Halstead, well, what can I say as usual, but thank you very much for some great insights into leadership. You tied together the conference, and we're all motivated to make a great difference here. On
Thanks,
behalf of the
appreciate it.
superintendent and the Corps cadets, please accept this small gift.
All right,
And
cool, thank you.
Thanks again.
All
We'll
right,
invite
all
you
right.
back.
All right.